More of Ladies Can We Talk with Debbie Georgatos, right here on 660 AM The Answer.
Hello, welcome back to Ladies Can We Talk. Thank you again so much for tuning in, the fastest 2 hours of my week. I believe we have on the line Clare Lopez. Hello?
Hey, Debbie. Hi. I'm here.
Great. I'm so glad you're here, and thank you for coming on. Claire, I told our listeners in the first segment, you just have a wonderful biography. You are just really one of the nation's preeminent scholars and experts on the study of radical Islam and Islam itself, and especially with respect to Iran. And was so grateful you're able to join us tonight. I obviously want to tune right in and talk with you about what happened in Paris on Friday. And, I have a funny question, which it kind of gelled to me today. The ISIS is expanding. They have territory in Syria and Iraq. And I mean, what is the motivation behind doing an attack like Paris? I mean, are they trying to goad us into fighting them, or are they? What do you think the motive would be for that attack?
Yeah, Debbie, I think you're exactly on the right track right there. The Islamic State has been trying desperately for more than a year to drag Western, or as they would say it, Crusader forces into a land battle in the former Syria, because their end times ideology says that the final battles of the end times, their Armageddon, must take place around the northern Syrian city of Dabiq. Dabiq, of course, being the name of the Islamic State's online published magazine. And unless they can have Crusader forces on the ground there, they can't have their end times. They don't get their Armageddon. And so, although attacking against what we might call the far enemy, what they would call the far enemy, up until now has more been a hallmark of Al-Qaeda than it has the Islamic State, which has been focused up until now really more on building its caliphate, establishing the caliphate, the government of the caliphate, administration, and all of that. This is a departure in Paris. This attack is definitely a departure. It was an enormously sophisticated operation involving probably dozens of operatives. And so we really need to pay attention to this.
Well, I have to tell you, I feel frustrated with the... And actually, just ask your opinion about it. I've always had the sense you see that the attacks happen in different parts of the world, some in Africa, and this obviously in Western Europe, and then you have many attacking more in the Middle Eastern parts. But it's all stemming from Islam and the teachings of Islam, and I don't know what that means in terms of trying to fight back, like trying to, to me, the Islamic thought seems, we almost like hurt ourselves by not connecting the dots more between Islamic groups. But is that right, or are we better dealing with each group piecemeal?
No, again, you're absolutely right. And what unites all of these groups, you're absolutely right, whether it be Al-Qaeda, whether it be the Islamic State, Hamas, Hezbollah, Taliban, or the Iranian jihadist regime. And when I say jihadist, I mean that's what their constitution says. They're a jihadist regime in Tehran. What unites them is the very self-same ideology of Islam. It is authoritative, orthodox, mainstream. There's nothing radical or extreme about it. It's straight up the middle. Authoritative Islam, according to the doctrine and the law and the scripture. Now, we are very happy that many, many, many Muslims don't subscribe to that. They call themselves Muslims, and it's not for us to say otherwise, but they don't follow the command of their faith to jihad. But 100% of those who attack us, like the jihadis in Paris, do follow the doctrine of Islam, and what they do can be matched to not only what is written in the doctrine and the law of Sharia, of Islamic law, but also in the biography as we have it, as it has come down to us, of Muhammad. So because Muhammad is cited in the Quran multiple times as the perfect example for mankind to emulate, whatever Muslims do to follow his example is considered the highest level of faithfulness to Islam. And of course, for anyone who's actually read the Sirat, or the biography of Muhammad, it's pretty grim stuff. And but that is what we're looking at here. And so we really have to be careful not to call this radical Islam or extremist Islam. It's like saying, a Christian who really tries hard to follow the Ten Commandments and emulate the life of Jesus Christ, that's an extreme Christian. That's a radical Christian. That's a Christianist. We don't say that, do we?
No.
We only discriminate against Muslims in this regard, and I cannot, for the life of me, figure out why.
So really what you're saying, that the people who commit these kind of acts, they're following the teachings of Islam. We shouldn't call them radical Islamists, just call them Muslims or followers of Islam.
Devout Muslims. But at the same time, I think we do need to take care to separate the doctrine, law, scripture of Islam, that is the canon of Islam, from people, from individual people who should be treated as individuals, as individual human beings. And if they choose, as many, many millions of Muslims do, to practice their faith under the protection of the First Amendment, prayer, worship, devotion, diet, fasting, pilgrimage, proselytizing, if that's how they practice Islam, then they're completely covered by the First Amendment. But any who step outside of that and seek instead to replace our Constitution or another Western law with Sharia, with Islamic law in the United States under our Constitution, Article 6, that would be a violation of American law, because Article 6 says the supreme law of the land shall be the Constitution of the United States. And seeking to replace it is not an act of religion. It is a political act or a legal act.
Yeah, Claire, you're touching on something we've talked about in the show many times, which is one problem with Islam anywhere in the world, but particularly in America, is that with other religions, they all relate to our set of beliefs about what God is and what ultimate truth is. But in Islam, the truth about what they think of God and Allah and Muhammad is interwoven, really like threads in a blanket, like it's interwoven with a political and a military agenda, because Sharia is a set of laws that cannot exist in America, or else we have to abandon American law, as you're saying. And it's also the Sharia is one issue, and then just the whole concept of whether we have a separate government which is secular and we have religions, or is it all one, which under Islam is all one? So it's a very hard thing in America. I guess you're kind of thinking that some Muslims here at least have agreed to live under America's system and are not problematic, which then ties into, I want to ask you, so what do you think about all the refugees that President Obama wants to bring here? How do we know these people who grew up in Islamic majority countries, how do we know what they think, which way they think about these things?
Well, we don't know. And as a matter of fact, James Comey, the director of the FBI, who has testified in open session in front of Congress on multiple occasions, has said very clearly that there is no way to vet many of these who are selected to be refugees. Now, we have to understand something about the refugee system. It is directed by the United Nations High Commission on Refugees, the United Nations itself, of course, and specifically agencies like the UNHCR, are heavily dominated by the OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the Muslim countries of the world. There are 56 of them. Oh. And that domination has a lot of influence on the way the refugee selection program works. And so the UN is in charge of that selection process out of refugee camps that it runs and establishes overseas near war zones, for instance, in Turkey or Lebanon or Jordan. And so heavily weighted, the ones they select are Muslims.
Yep.
Now, the problem, as you just alluded, Debbie, is that those coming from a war zone like that, and particularly if they are Muslim, there is absolutely no way to vet them or to check their backgrounds. First of all, because it's a war zone they're fleeing, they may not have even had proper documents in terms of a birth certificate which police force are you going to do a background check with in the former Syria?
Yes.
Or the former Iraq, for that matter. And then the other part of that is that no one is asking the proper questions of these refugees to vet them, which are, among others, do you believe, do you support jihad for the imposition of Sharia worldwide? They're not allowed to ask questions like that, or they just don't. And so it's a very problematic issue when we're talking about bringing Syrians in particular to this country. Now, another part of this is the prevalence of false documentation. We know from the news that within the last, couple weeks or so, the Bulgarian security services confiscated a truckload of fake Syrian passports headed for Europe. Now,
wow, I missed that story.
Who's going to use those? Who's going to use those passports? Well, the army of mainly young, fit Muslim men who just invaded Europe on Hijra migration to invade the continent, settle there, the settlement process, as the Muslim Brotherhood would call it. This is very problematic in terms of the United States also, even though we're not facing that level of invasion that Europe has. We do have a White House and a president that seem oblivious to the security risks of bringing in unvetted and unvettable, if that's a word, impossible to be vetted, potential refugees.
I think unvettable is a great word, and it summarizes the problem with bringing people here who really, I was reading in the first segment of the show, quotes by all sorts of Islamic leaders in a variety of Muslim-dominant countries, whether they were Supreme Court justices, they were university professors, they were political leaders, government leaders of various kinds, all basically saying jihad is your duty as a Muslim. And so if you are raised in that environment and that's what you think, when they want to come here to America, how do you figure out, what they really think? It's a very, very hard thing. So, you could end up thinking the wise thing, which is what I think, is we just need to not be bringing Muslim refugees to America at this time.
Well, let me mention a bill that is in Congress right now. It was sponsored by Representative Brian Babin of Texas. And the bill basically just says, hit the pause button right now until we can sort out who the refugees are, how many are coming, how they've been vetted, if they've been vetted, and the numbers that are projected to go to which municipalities who don't even have a say-so or a participation in the process, which, by the way, check out Ann Corcoran and Refugee Resettlement Watch, her website, for information on how this system works for the United States. It goes from the Muslim-dominated, OIC-dominated United Nations to the State Department. State Department contracts out by the head, paying by the head to local NGOs, non-governmental organizations, or VOLAGs, voluntary organizations, to bring in refugees, bypassing completely the states, the governors, the state legislatures, and the local municipalities, who sometimes find out who's coming into town when the bus rolls up full of refugees.
Yeah, this is what
the Brian Babin bill is important for people to get behind.
It certainly is. I'm glad you mentioned it. We're going to mention it again. We've had actually Ann Corcoran on the show too, trying to wake people up, because the American spirit of just being a good people, a generous people. We hear about refugees and Refugee Resettlement Act sounds so nice, and so I've had Ann Corcoran talking about on the show, just talking about how really dangerous it can be, all done in the spirit of American goodness and generosity, but bringing people here who either do mean us harm or don't have any intention of embracing Western-style liberty that we have here. And then once they're here, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to keep track of them, and we don't keep track of them. It's a real thing. I want to ask you one last thing. I know we're going long, but do you have one more minute?
All right. Yes.
Okay. Sure. Here's my one last thing. So Hillary Clinton said, and I know you're nonpartisan, but Hillary Clinton said in the debate, essentially, that it was not wise for America to be a leader in the military effort to fight back against ISIS in response to the Paris attack, because that's what ISIS wants. They're trying to draw in the great Satan, or I should say afterwards, one of her handlers said this is what she meant to say, that they were trying to draw in the great Satan, which is America, and once they did that, it would be terrible, so that we're safer having America not having a bold presence fighting back against ISIS. I've always thought the opposite. I want the world and the bad guys in the world to see America as a serious force to be reckoned with and be afraid of us. So what do you think about that?
In this particular instance, I have to say I agree with Hillary Clinton. The morass of fighting over there involves not just an intra-Islamic Shiite versus Sunni struggle that's been going on for practically 1,400 years, but it is also complicated by ethnic and tribal divisions and rivalries and hatreds. We have no dog in that fight. Now, what we do have are allies and those who should be our allies over there. Primarily, number one, we should be very vocally supporting Israel and providing additional assistance, whatever they need or would like. Number two, Jordan, and number three, the Kurds. We should be drawing a cordon around the mess in the former Iraq and the former Syria, because let's face it, Baghdad and Damascus are Iranian satraps. They are puppet regimes of the Tehran regime. Why on earth would we allow Americans to be the Iranians' cat's paw to fight their enemy, the Islamic State? If they want to save their own puppet regimes in Baghdad and Damascus, let them. We support our friends in the region. Additional assistance in particular is due to the Kurds, who are fighting an Islamic State armed with the top most sophisticated American weapons that they seized from the fleeing Iraqi army units, and the Kurds do not have the same level of weaponry. They need it. They deserve it. We should be providing that to them. And if we need to send special forces to help train the Kurds on the brand new weaponry that we ought to be providing them, that's fine too, so long as they are under strict restrictions to operate only inside of Kurdish areas and to support the Kurds. I don't think that's our fight. I think that we need to support those in the region whose fight it is. And the other thing I want to be very clear about is I do not want to be any part of clearing board over there for Iran. Iran is a jihadist regime, or has a jihadist regime, every bit as bad as the Islamic State. They fight for the same objectives. They fight for the same ideology. It is madness, in my view, to support one over the other, to help one set of jihadist enemies to best the other. Why? So that the one left standing is even stronger at the end of it all? Doesn't make sense. Support our friends and allies in the region. Hit the Islamic State elsewhere. For instance, West Africa, Libya, Sinai Peninsula, we should be helping Egypt. But in that heartland area where the Islamic State has declared the caliphate, that's Iran's mess. Let them clean it up, and we help our friends and allies in the area around it to make sure it doesn't spread.
Clare Lopez, I am so glad you were available to call in this evening. We've been speaking with Clare Lopez. She's a strategic policy and intelligence expert. She's obviously extremely well-versed in all things Middle East, all things relating to Islam. Thank you so very much for calling in tonight and for your insights. We appreciate you very much.
Thanks, Debbie. Glad to be with you.